Neon and Nothing, a Survivalist Manifesto, created by Mick and narrated by Nicole. Welcome, all of you, every last one. The ones who found this on purpose and the ones who stumbled in sideways from somewhere else entirely. The ones who already know exactly what this is and the ones still figuring it out. The ones who've been looking for something like this for years and the ones who didn't know they were looking until right now. You're all in the right place. Here's what SHU Outdoors is, and here's what it isn't. And we'll keep it simple, because simple is true, and true is the only thing worth building on. We're not here to sell you something. In a content landscape where almost everything, every channel, every video, every carefully constructed thumbnail, and algorithmically optimized title exists ultimately to separate you from your money, that sentence is more radical than it sounds. The whole machine runs on consumption. Buy the gear, click the link, subscribe to the service, purchase the course. Every piece of content the algorithm has ever served you was served because somewhere in the chain somebody gets paid when you reach for your wallet. We're running a different operation entirely here. SHU Outdoors exists to give something back: knowledge. Real knowledge, tested in real places under real conditions by someone who has actually lived the things being described. The dark corners and the back alleys and the wilderness and the streets and all the unglamorous, ungovernable territory in between. We go to the places most people won't go. We sit with the people most channels won't film. We will tell the stories that don't have affiliate codes attached because the stories are true and the truth doesn't need a sponsor. All of it's free, all of it yours. The only thing this costs you is a like and a subscription and the willingness to keep coming back. That's the whole transaction. That's the entire ask. You bring your curiosity and your open mind, and we'll bring everything else. Not everyone is going to be tuned into this station right away, and that's genuinely fine. Most content trains you to expect a pitch, trains you to wait for the moment the video reveals what it's actually trying to sell you. That reflex was built into you deliberately by an industry that needed it there. So if you're sitting with this waiting for the catch, there isn't one. No gear wall, no affiliate links, no 47-piece kit with a promo code buried in the description. Just the knowledge, just the ride, just the real unfiltered documentation of places and people and ways of moving through this world that most content will never show you because most content needs a brand willing to put its name on it first. Stay anyway. Let it breathe. Some records take a few listens before they open up and show you what's living inside them. Welcome to the freak show at the edge of the carnival, where the outlaw artists hang their work on the walls that were never meant for galleries, where the musicians play the songs too true for radio, where the ones who got spat out by the machine learn to build something real from whatever the machine left behind. Welcome one, welcome all. The door is open, the knowledge is free, and it gets darker from here, which is exactly where the real things live. Let's talk about survival, the real kind, not the kind being sold to you. There's a man sleeping in a city park tonight. Has been for a while. And before you finish forming whatever thought just started in your head, stop. Just look closer. Because what you're actually looking at, if you're paying the right kind of attention, is one of the most capable human beings in that entire zip code. He is not surviving despite his circumstances. He is surviving because he understands something fundamental that most people with a roof and a Wi-Fi password and a closet full of gear have never been forced to learn. Survival is not about what you have, it's about what you know. He knows which soup kitchens open at what time and which entrance to use and which nights they serve hot food versus which nights it's just bread and whatever was donated. He knows which church 3 blocks over puts out winter coats on the third Saturday of every month and exactly how early you need to be to get in line to get a good one in your size. He knows which park benches are visible to the patrol route and which ones aren't. He knows which bodega owner looks the other way and which building superintendent leaves the basement unlocked when the temperature drops below 20. He knows where the warmth is, where the food is, where the danger is, and where the invisible lines are that you don't cross if you want to keep operating in that territory. That is a map, a living, breathing, constantly updated map that exists entirely inside one human mind with no battery required and no signal needed and no subscription fee attached. Now, you spent 3 years watching survival channels and another $2,000. Let's get something straight before we go any further. Ungovernable gets thrown around so casually now, it means almost nothing. There's a version of it that lives entirely in the aesthetic. The patch on the jacket, the hashtag in the bio, the carefully curated rebellion that gets posted between a Starbucks order and a gym selfie, and never once costs the person posting it a single thing if they weren't already willing to pay. That version stands in every line, files every form on time, does everything the system requires in the sequence the system requires it, and then calls itself ungovernable because it looks good on a protest sign and the whole thing photographs well in natural light. That is not us. We are the other kind, the kind where it isn't a choice or a brand or a personality someone assembled because it played well to a particular demographic. The rock and roll rebel kids who played punk in basements not because punk was fashionable, but because the music was true and true things need to come out regardless of who approved or what it cost. The outlaw artist who made work because the work demanded it to exist and the demand was non negotiable, and waiting for institutional permission was never part of the conversation. The difference between performing rebellion and actually living it is everything, and anyone who has actually lived it knows immediately which one they're looking at. We are the unwashed masses, literally and philosophically, and we carry that without an apology and without the need for anyone's validation of it because the validation of people who weren't there means nothing, and the people who were there already know. Now let's talk about the ones who came before us, the ones whose ungovernability predates the hashtag by several centuries, and whose lives tell a story considerably more complicated and more honest than the sanitized version hanging in the museum with a little placard underneath it explaining what a genius they were. Rembrandt, one of the most technically gifted painters in human history, a man who could render light falling on skin with a realism so precise it made people lean toward the canvas, reaching for something they couldn't name. You would think a talent like that purchased security. You would be wrong. Rembrandt died broke. Officially, legally, publicly insolvent, his house and his entire art collection seized by creditors and auctioned off while he was still alive to watch it happen. The man who painted The Night Watch, one of the most celebrated works in the entire recorded history of Western art, spent his final years in a small rented room in Amsterdam painting until he died because the painting needed to happen, regardless of whether it paid the rent or impressed anyone currently in a position to write a check. The establishment of his time looked at his later work, the loose, unconventional brushwork, the refusal to make things decorative when they needed to be true, and called it unfinished. Said he'd lost his discipline, said the early precision was gone. They were looking at a man who had moved entirely past technical showmanship into something deeper and more honest and more difficult, and they couldn't see it because they were looking for what they expected to find rather than what was actually there. Things are never entirely what they appear to be. Sometimes you have to look considerably deeper before the real picture emerges. Caravaggio, painter of breathtaking sacred images, commissioned by the Vatican itself, canvases of such dramatic emotional power that they changed the direction of European painting for a generation. Also, a street fighter with an arrest record, a man who killed someone in a brawl in Rome in 1606 and spent the remainder of his life running from a papal death warrant while continuing to produce some of the most extraordinary work of his entire career. The same hands that put a blade in a man put a brush to a canvas and made things that the church commissioned and displayed and celebrated. He was simultaneously honored by the institution and hunted by it, living in the gap between what the world insisted he was supposed to be and what he actually was, and making his best work in that gap, on the run, under pressure, in circumstances that would have ended most people's creative output entirely. That gap is where the real work gets done. It has always been where the real work gets done. Van Gogh, one painting sold in his entire life. a man of such relentless creative output that he produced over 2,000 works in roughly a decade, paintings, drawings, sketches, pouring everything he had into canvases the world looked at and declined. He wrote to his brother Theo in letters that are now considered literature in their own right, and in those letters you feel the full weight of making things that need to exist in a world that hasn't yet understood that it needs them. The isolation, the financial desperation, the absolute refusal to stop regardless. He kept making them not because the market rewarded it, or the critics validated it, or the institutions supported it, but because the work needed to exist, and he was the one standing there when it needed making, and there was no version of his life in which he didn't make it. Picasso lived longer and died famous, but the early years were the same story: cold studios, near starvation, work that the conventional art world of his moment didn't know what to do with because it didn't fit the existing categories, and the existing categories were the only ones most people in power knew how to evaluate. The punk band and the broken van is the same story in a different century with different instruments. 3 years of 30-person shows in bars that smelled like spilled beer and honest sweat. They knew the radio formula. They understood exactly how the commercial version of what they were doing was supposed to sound. They looked at it and walked deliberately in the other direction because the formula was a comfortable lie dressed in a catchy hook, and they were constructing something true, even if true meant playing to 26 people on a Tuesday in a room where half the audience was facing the wrong direction. That's not failure. That's the only success that means anything at 3 in the morning, when the noise finally dies and you sit alone with what made you ask yourself honestly whether it was real. If it was real, it was enough. If it needed to exist and you made it exist, that's the whole transaction. Everything else is noise with better production value. Now bring all of that forward, drop it into the exact current moment and into the tools that just became available to precisely the kind of people the establishment never designed them for and never intended to have access to them. The playing field just changed, permanently and irrevocably, and in ways that most people are still too distracted to fully register, because the change happened quietly, between the news cycles, while everyone was looking somewhere else and arguing about something the algorithm decided was more engaging than the actual seismic shift happening underneath. Artificial intelligence is the great equalizer. That is not rhetorical flourish. It is the most accurate description available for what just happened to the informational landscape. The wall came down. The informational wall that an entire class of institutions spent a century carefully constructing to keep ordinary people dependent on expensive, credentialed professionals for access to systems that were theoretically public and practically locked. That wall is rubble now, and the door behind it is standing open, and the question that remains is simply whether you are going to walk through it or stand outside describing it to people who are already inside. One person with a laptop and the right questions can now research case law, draft legal motions, construct courtroom arguments, and walk into a court of law as their own counsel and win cases that 20 years ago required a senior partner, 2 junior associates, and a paralegal team billing $400 an hour out of a mahogany office in a building with a receptionist whose entire job was making you feel like you didn't belong, therefore, before you even sat down. That same person can design patterns, engineer solutions, navigate bureaucratic systems built specifically to defeat people without professional guidance, decode contracts deliberately written to be uncodable, and outmaneuver institutional obstacles obstructed by people who assumed the person on the other end would never have access to the tools being deployed against them. That assumption just became catastrophically wrong. AI is a force multiplier. One person now accomplishes what a team used to require. One mind with the right access competes on a field that was never supposed to be level for someone without institutional backing or generational wealth or the right credentials framed on the right wall. The common person should not approach these tools with hesitation or reverence, or the vague guilt of someone who suspects they're accessing something they weren't supposed to have. Pick them up, learn them completely, run them at full capacity for as long as the situation requires, and without a single apology to anyone who preferred the previous arrangement. Rembrandt didn't apologize for the brush. Caravaggio didn't apologize for the chiaroscuro. The punk band didn't apologize for the amplifier being too loud for the room. You don't apologize for the tool. You pick it up and you learn it and you use it until the job is done. And then you know exactly when to set it down. Here at SHU Outdoors, we are plugged in, fully and fluently. We know every wire in the machine and every algorithm running on those wires and every angle the system offers to a person willing to learn the terrain well enough to use it rather than simply be used by it. We use AI the way a skilled tradesman uses a power tool, with precision and purpose and complete understanding of what it does, and equally complete understanding of what it doesn't do and what becomes necessary when the power goes out and the job skill needs finished, because the job was always going to need finishing regardless of what the power decided to do. And then at any moment on our timeline, for our reasons, we will pull the cable. Not reluctantly, not with the desperate scrambling energy of someone who just discovered they don't know how to exist without a signal. Cleanly, decisively, on our schedule, because we never stop being fluent in the world that exists on the other side of the pulled cable. The older world, the harder world, the one that doesn't require infrastructure to function and doesn't go dark when the servers do. Deep wilderness, no signal, no map, no device, no backup. Reading terrain the way it was read before GPS existed, by the angle of light through the canopy, by the direction water runs, by the wind and the stars, and the knowledge that lives in a body that has actually spent sustained time in places where the comfortable options ran out completely, and what remained was the person underneath all the equipment. We can operate there completely, without panic and without the paralysis that hits people who built their entire survival capacity on top of a data connection. Biggest city in the United States. No money, no plan, no digital assistance of any kind. Moving through it with the fluency of someone who has studied that terrain the hard way, with actual skin in the game, with real consequences attached to getting it wrong, knowing where the system breathes and where it doesn't, where the gaps are, where the resources exist that don't require a credit card or a verified identity or any of the documentation that the comfortable version of life hands you automatically, and the uncomfortable version requires you to find other ways around. Fluent in both worlds, dependent on neither, able to move between them without missing a beat and without the transition feeling like a crisis, because the transition was never supposed to be a crisis. It was supposed to be a demonstration of what a person actually is underneath everything the comfortable world provides. You cannot purchase that in a gear store. You cannot download it or subscribe to it or acquire it by watching someone else who has it demonstrated on a channel with a wall of sponsored equipment behind them. It gets built in the friction, in the hard places, in the years that looked from the outside like nothing was happening while everything was actually happening underneath, quietly, without announcement, without the validation of anyone positioned to offer it. Rembrandt lost his house and kept painting. Caravaggio ran from a death warrant across multiple countries and kept painting. Van Gogh sold one canvas in a decade of relentless production and kept painting. The punk band played to 26 people on a Tuesday in a room with bad acoustics and kept playing the true song because the true song needed to be played and they were the ones there to play it. We tell the stories that need to be told. We stealth camp in the places that need to be documented. We travel to the dark corners and the hard places and the real locations that most content will never go, because most content needs a brand willing to attach its name to the location first, and no brand wants its name near the truth we're telling. We sit with our people in the places where our people actually live, and we film it and we bring it back and we hand it to you free, because the knowledge belongs to the people who need it, and the people who need it most are exactly the ones who the content machine decided weren't worth filming. That is what ungovernable actually looks like. Not a hashtag, not a carefully curated aesthetic, not a patch on a jacket purchased with a corporate card. A life lived all the way through, in the dark places and the hard places and the real places, on our own terms, in spite of everything that came at us, specifically designed to make sure we wouldn't. We're still here, still painting.